I'll start with talking about Pet, which is Catherine's novel. So Pet is a dark and twisted story, and it's not a thriller. We just discussed this in the author's lounge just now. It's been positioned as a thriller, but it's not a conventional thriller as you imagine it at all. And the story is set in New Zealand, and it begins in Auckland in 2014 when the main character Justine, she is visiting her father in a home, and he has dementia, and there's something, and she's visiting her father with her daughter Emma, and then something happens to set off her memories, and then the narrative moves back to 1984. To her time, when she was a young girl in school. And we are transported back to her memories and that time in her life when her mother was dying of cancer. And then the story takes us to basically the thrust of the book, which is it's based on a school teacher. And it's about Justine's relationship with the school teacher. So the school teacher is Mrs. Price, and she's a very, very glamorous figure. She's very beautiful, very attractive, and all the students are very fond of her, and they want to be her pet, right? So that is the title of the novel as well, and all the students want to be adored by Mrs. Price, but underneath the glamorous exterior, there's something dark and sinister looming. And Mrs. Price, she picks favorites to do special jobs for her after school, and she dotes on them. And then soon things start going missing in the school, and the story kind of takes on from there. So, Catherine, what I wanted to ask you really is, you position memory and you focus on memory very strongly in Pet, right? So the novel makes many connections under the theme of memory. Justine's mother has lost her memories as she was dying, 30 years after the heart of the story takes place. Justine cares for her father who has dementia, as I mentioned earlier. And the book's most pivotal moments happen within the spaces of memory. And so the novel is really about memory and how unreliable and how fickle and how undependable really and subjective memory is. So can you speak a little bit about the role of memory and how you portrayed it in the book, and also how the structure of the suspense, the book is a suspense, right, psychological suspense, how you position memory through this structure, and how it contributes to your position as, you want to focus on the unreliability of memory. So can you talk a little bit about that? Mike?
Is that better? Yeah, great. Thanks, Anisha, and thank you to the festival for inviting me into the New Zealand High Commission for bringing me over here. It's such a treat to be in India for the first time. So yes, memory. The very first lines in the book involve Justine visiting her father at the care home, and she thinks that one of the caregivers there is someone she remembers from her past. So the very first lines are, I know it's Mrs. Price, and I know it can't be Mrs. Price. That's what I keep thinking. My eyes are playing tricks on me, or the light is, or my memory is. So she thinks that this caregiver in the home is her old teacher, this glamorous, charismatic, manipulative woman, but she also knows, because of the age of this person, that it can't be Mrs. Price. So those opening lines are really setting the reader up for a book in which memory is not stable, and the ground under Justine, the narrator's feet, is not stable. I talk also a lot in the book related to memory about sight, seeing. She says in that opening, my eyes are playing tricks on me. And if an interested reader wanted to go through and highlight every word in the book that's related to vision, there would be a lot of highlighted words in the book. So one of the very first scenes when the action flashes back to Justine's school days is the students dissecting a cow's eye in the classroom. And I wanted to really keep returning to that theme of memory, of not being able to believe what you see, not being able to believe what you think you remember, as a way of destabilising the reader's experience in parallel with Justine's experience of feeling destabilised, that she's not sure who to believe, she's not sure where her loyalties should lie. She desperately wants to be the favourite of Mrs. Price, but there might be a price to pay for the golden light of Mrs. Price's light shining on her. So when I was thinking about Justine, you know, she's the same age as I was, roughly, in 1980s New Zealand, and so of course I fed a lot of my own experience into that character. And when I was that age and younger, I was sick a lot as a child, and I was home from school a lot, and that's really where I started writing and reading and thinking about creating imaginary worlds to entertain myself. And I also felt like an outsider because of that. So I wanted to gift that experience to Justine, but it wasn't interesting enough for her just to be sick and home from school. I wanted the thing that's wrong with her to drive the narrative too. And so that's when I settled on giving her the experience of epilepsy and seizures. And the seizures are the thing that affect her memory. So after a seizure, she can't quite remember what happened before and during and immediately after. So there are these holes in her memory, and she, in the later sections, in the 2014 sections as an adult, she's desperately trying to piece together what actually happened back in 1984, what actually happened with Mrs. Price, and what did I do, or what might I have done? And this is a question that haunts her, and that haunts the reader too, and it's one that she can't answer, because the only person who can fill in those gaps for her is her father, and by the time she thinks maybe she could talk to him about it, it's too late. He's already entering dementia, and he can't be relied upon either. And I based that on my experience of seeing my mother go through dementia and realising that I wish I'd asked her certain questions about our family history before now. You kind of think that you have all the time in the world to fill those gaps, and you don't.
Thanks so much. Can you read a little bit for us? Would you like to read?
I would love to. So the passage that I'll read involves a group of girls, the favourites, going round to Mrs. Price's house on the weekend, and Mrs. Price puts makeup on them. So it also mentions the 1980s pop sensation Duran Duran, if you're familiar with them, and Simon Le Bon was the lead singer, and every 14-year-old girl wanted to be Simon Le Bon's girlfriend. Okay. She made up each one of us in turn, applying blusher to give us cheekbones, brushing on eyeshadow as fine as pollen. We closed our eyes and felt her touching our delicate lids, turning them fuchsia, tangerine, peacock green, electric blue, and then she stroked the mascara wand through our eyelashes, and we tried to hold very still. The lipstick came last, her frosted pink as coconut ice. When we looked in her mirror, we did not recognise ourselves. "What about you?" I said to her reflection. "Shall we make you up too?" She laughed, clapped her hands, took a seat on the velvet stool. We didn't really know what we were doing, but she taught us all the tricks. Lighter shadow on the lid itself, darker shadow in the socket, something shimmery on the brow bone, silver in the inner corners to open up the eyes. Blend, blend, blend. Concealer to cover up every flaw. Don't be afraid of going too far. An extra dot of gloss in the centre of the bottom lip to give it pout. We took down her ponytail and teased and sprayed her hair, pinning it up this way and that, parting it on one side, then the other to see what suited, just as we did with our dolls. But where are you going, we said. What are we making you up for? A nightclub? A movie? A romantic dinner? A Duran Duran concert, she said, though they had never been to New Zealand because we were too far away from everywhere else. And what will you wear, we said, and she opened her wardrobe and said, you choose. It was a small room in its own right, and it looked like a shop. Some of the clothes still had price tags attached. Perhaps a bat-wing blouse with a wide belt and jelly bean yellow tights, or a brocade bolero with a polka dot dress, or striped leg warmers over jeans, or something sexy and slouchy and off the shoulder. You have so many pretty things, we said. And she said, when I was a child, I had nothing. In the end, we chose a strapless gold gown with a choker of fake pearls. Faux, she said, not fake. And a wide-brimmed black hat. Black stilettos, the heels as skinny as our pinky fingers, and a gold clutch purse. We laid it all out on the bed and unhooked the tiny gold crucifix from her neck. The chain felt as fine as hair. And when she stripped off her clothes, we pretended to look away. She asked us to help her with the zip of her dress and the clasp of her choker, and then there she stood, as beautiful as a model, as beautiful as the lady from the Speed Slimmer ad. Speaking of hairy legs, she said, and showed us her stubble. We could hardly see it, tiny dots of pepper on her golden brown skin, but we could feel it all right. Simon Le Bon wouldn't like that, would he, girls, she said, and winked at us. Off to the bathroom we went. Hitching up her gown, she sat on the edge of the bath while we soaped her legs and ran the razor over them. We'd never used one, and we were terrified and thrilled. She closed her eyes and let out a long, delicious breath. Before we left for home, she made us wash our faces. Our little secret, she said.
That was great. Thanks so much, Catherine. Okay, we'll move on to Helga's book, Toxic now, which also features a school teacher, but in your book, the school teacher is the protagonist, right? So your school teacher is Matilde, and the story is that she's forced to leave her teaching job in Oslo after she has a relationship with her student, an 18-year-old called Jacob. And she flees to the countryside, and she's looking for a more authentic, traditional life. This is just in the pandemic, during the COVID pandemic, so it's a very contemporary book. And she moves to a dairy farm on the outskirts of Oslo, and the story kind of unfolds from there. And it's the book has been described as, a tale about female rebellion and disobedience. And, beneath the surface of this friendly and very pastoral rural life, there's something a lot darker, right? And sort of less harmonic that's taking place. So Toxic it has been described as psychologically taut, emotionally tantalizing, and intellectually teasing, and unfailingly tenacious. This is a book you really should add to your library. Helga Flatland merges folklore of female rebellion and defiance with a story of obsession and toxic love to create a novel that feels both relatable and original. So, Helga, what I wanted to ask you really is, your book is a lot about secrets and suspense that the characters keep from each other, right? It's about varying. It's told from different people's perspectives and positions, and often their telling of the events is very different from the others, right? So it's about different people's perspectives, and there's no sort of objective truth that's portrayed. So what I wanted to ask you is, what role do kind of secrets and silence play in shaping the tension and the conflict within your novel, Toxic?
Good sum up of the novel, and thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Yes, I think there's a difference between what you call secrets and the things we don't tell each other. Because secrets sounds intentionally, and I've been interested in the silent communication that exists everywhere. And in Toxic, there is a lot of things that isn't being communicated. The silent communication between the individuals are sort of creating the suspense, but it's not always intentional. And I'm from a county that's called Telemark in Norway. It's from a small village called Flatland. And there, the masculine ideal is sort of being the traditionally strong, silent type with a love for power tools. But it's often also referred to as toxic. But I don't think it's toxic in itself. It's more of a demographic, cultural thing that the silence and the lack of communication and to bear your secrets or your pain for yourself without talking about it is sort of an ideal. And that's what will create also the misunderstandings and the problems between Matilda, the protagonist, and Just, the other protagonist, in the novel. So I don't think it's as much about secrets as the things that are being misunderstood or misinterpreted by the things that by the cultural differences between Matilda, that is from Oslo, a very modern, urban kind of girl, and Just, who is more the traditional, silent kind of type.
Right, yeah. So you portray it more as a, like you said, rather than intentional secrets, more as a sort of a product of the culture of the time and the location, right? That leads to the suspense and leads to the, you know, the taut and the tight tension in your book.
Absolutely, and also the subtext of this novel is based largely upon the old traditional tales that are told in every culture, but also in Norway, where relating to the folk music, there are these tales about that you tell when you are performing a folk music piece on the Hardanger fiddle, which is a very special fiddle in Norway, and you are presenting a tale that's connected to the musical piece. And these tales are, I grew up with these tales, and I know them by heart because they've been surrounding me all my life. And in these tales, there are stories about women, and rebellious women and obedient women that are sort of being punished, or they're being judged, but they're facing a destiny that's sort of they're actually being punished, and a lot of tales are telling these stories about the women, and they are told by men for generations. They are told by men about these women that are obedient and has to be punished, and that is the subtext for the whole novel and for the story about Matilda, who is a modern, and she's not self-aware, actually. She is not self-aware that she is this highly provocative when she enters this little village. She's not self-aware that she is that provoking, but she is perceived as very provoking, and, well, she does get punished.
So we'll talk a little bit about, you know, the provocative nature of Matilde and also the folk tales and how they punish women. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But it would be great if Catherine will do a short reading of Helga's work.
Yeah, I won't read it myself because reading my own words that I wrote in Norwegian in English is sort of yeah, you wouldn't want to hear it either. But Catherine has been so nice, so I think that she's promoting my novel. So it's very good, very competitive, but good. Yes, thank you. So she will read for me about Matilda.
I wish I wrote this. The whole village turns its back on me in a way that's impossible to confront because no one says anything. They smile briefly at me in the shop. They nod at me if I meet them on the street. My neighbour said a few words about the weather over the fence this morning. And had it not been for the fact that I've lived here for almost a year, I might not have even noticed. Because the change is subtle and impressively coordinated, as though the strategy and codes were pre-agreed before I returned. I can't put my finger on what it is, can't figure out what's me and what's them. And maybe that's how it works, the village beast. It infects you with paranoia and pits you against yourself. Predictably, I object to being so dismissed. Oh my God, just come home, Mum says on the phone. You've got nothing to prove, which, first of all, isn't true. I've got plenty to prove, plenty to show them. And secondly, it would just add fuel to the fire. It also infuriates me that Mum thinks I should give in, give up, and it makes me even more defiant. The whole village knows about you and Andres, Jos said yesterday after he terminated my lease, and I said that I'd just find another house to rent. Nobody will consider renting to you, he replied. Nobody wants you here. I wasn't surprised about them terminating the lease, or about how the family took Andres's side and blamed me. But the way everyone clearly thinks that I'm solely to blame, that it was me who lured innocent Andres into my net, is harder to accept. It's not me who's married, I want to shout. It's not me who's been unfaithful. I don't shout it, but I'm determined to use my remaining time to show them that it's not me who should be ashamed, it's not me who should have any remorse. But Andres is hiding. I've seen no trace of him in the 2 weeks I've been here. I texted him, even though I know he's blocked my number. Then I switched to messaging him on Facebook and sent maybe 100 messages, which he hasn't opened. You're not getting rid of me, it said in the last one, which I sent late yesterday evening.
Okay, thanks so much, Catherine and Helga. So I thought it would also be interesting to now ask a couple of questions to both of you, right? There were certain commonalities in the books. So I think what's really interesting is how strongly both your books focus on the tension and really the dynamic in the relationship between the past and the present, right? And how it is that characters who want to run away from the past, as in your case, or as in your case in Pet, where the past has taken place, the events of the past have taken place way back in 1984, and we are presently in 2014, so there's a long time gap. But really, both your novels focus on the fact that the past catches up, and that you can't escape the past. So I just wanted you to speak a little bit about how you position this dynamic between the past and the present in each of your books. Yeah, Catherine, if you can go first.
Yeah, so the narrative does switch between 2014 with adult Justine and 1984 with 12-year-old Justine. And the past will not leave her alone. As an adult, as I said, she's haunted by what happened or what she thinks happened or what might have happened in 1984. And it gets to the point where she really needs to know. She really needs to find out. And I think the reason that it comes to a head for her is that she has a daughter who is around the same age as she was in 1984. So the past is kind of brought back to her through her daughter's experience. But, one thing that I do in the novel is talk about the power that objects hold, that things hold. And so Justine's father is an antiques dealer and trades in the past, trades in acquiring and selling people's memories. And that's, perhaps not entirely a morally squeaky clean profession to be in. But I also use objects in the sense of the power that they hold for the children. So when things start being stolen from the children in the school, suspicion falls on Justine's best friend, Amy. And in the present, Justine is remembering back to that moment in the past and thinking, well, when should I have stepped in to defend my friend? And the fact that she didn't is something that she really can't live with and that she is constantly questioning herself about. So in that sense, the past is still absolutely live for her and won't kind of lie down and die.
Yeah. So, yeah, Helga, same question. I wanted to ask you about the past and present and the dynamic and just the fact that no matter how much you try to escape from the past, it catches up with you. So, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And I think the past in everybody's life is Matilda is obviously trying to run from her own mistakes in her past, and she's projecting it onto the need for a more authentic life on the countryside. But I think also that the past isn't just, at least in this novel, isn't just about her own past or the other characters' past. It's also the traditions, like in the past generations, how the traditions and the folk tales and the view of the women, how they should behave, react, is also something that haunts her and is making it difficult for her in the present, right? So it's just not her own past, but the traditions and the generations past.
Okay. Right. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. I also think, both your books really are about women and misogyny and the way you kind of portray them in different ways. In Pet amplifies the tiny world of a child and her teacher, and the teacher is often a woman, right, in our lives, who perhaps otherwise powerless has unlimited dominion in the universe of her classroom. And in Toxic, the grandfather character of the dairy farm where Matilde goes to live is a horrible authoritarian kind of figure. And he revels in sharing Norwegian folktales and music that are often about the subjugation of women, right? Like you just spoke about. And in Pet, Mrs. Price is she's a dark, sinister character, overtly very glamorous, but really dark. And she really portrays womanhood in all its complexity. And Matilde is portrayed as somebody who's self-absorbed, reckless, and not very self-aware. So I wanted to ask both of you, was it enjoyable really to write these dark, complex, complicated women characters? Because, often women have to be portrayed in fiction or on screen or whatever as likable, nice characters, right, to be palatable. So was it enjoyable to really do the opposite and just portray complicated, dark women? Yeah.
Okay, the answer to that is yes. But I think Matilde is, as you said, she's not as sophisticated as Mrs. Price, but she is sort of. I didn't want to write. I think in literature, or at least contemporary literature, and also it's women are portrayed as primarily caregivers with a lot of empathy, and very often as mothers, and they are reduced to being just that. And everything they do in life or in the narrative of the novel is connected to that caregiver role, or they are just bystanding characters. And in Matilda's case, I wanted her to be, as you said, she's not very sympathetic. She is not willing to compromise. She doesn't regret anything, although she does make a lot of mistakes, but she doesn't regret them, and she doesn't think she doesn't obsess with them in her own mind. And I think a lot of these traits are traits that we wouldn't raise an eyebrow if it were told about a man, a male character. And I had in Norway and also in other countries, there have been a lot of debate going on about Matilda because she's so provocative. And I have gotten emails and phone calls and Facebook messages from very angry readers that are highly provoked by Matilda. And I think that's fascinating because she's not, to me, I am very fond of her, actually. Maybe that says a lot about me, but, and I think it does. But I am very fond of her because I think she is she is facing her own mistakes in her way, but she is also subject to the male gaze about her, and she can't escape anywhere. And I can't remember your question, actually, so I just talked about, yeah.
I was just asking, was it enjoyable to write such a character? Yeah.
So short answer, yes.
Yes, for me too. I am definitely Team Mrs. Price. She has the best clothes. But also, you know, girls of that age are inevitably drawn to women like Mrs. Price, who are a little bit younger than their mothers. I had a mother who came to motherhood quite old, so as a child I remember looking at younger women or younger mothers who were very glamorous and thinking, wow, maybe I could be like that when I grow up. And I think it's a very common thing for girls around that age to be entranced by glamorous women who seem to have confidence and power. And I do think that Mrs. Price has been drawn to the profession of teaching because at that time in New Zealand, it was a sphere in which she could wield power over children, yes, but she could wield power. And one of the first scenes in the book where Justine sees Mrs. Price in action is when she's in her father's antique shop and there's this male customer there who's flirting outrageously with Mrs. Price. And Mrs. Price goes along with it for a few beats, and then she absolutely cuts him down to size. And that's an expression of power too. And Justine kind of sees this happening and again thinks, well, this is who I could be. But it's definitely power earned under the kind of realm of the patriarchy, under the realm of misogyny, which was absolutely unchecked at that time in New Zealand. So it's power because of what she looks like and how she dresses. And the reading that I read just before about putting on the makeup and dressing her up was very much Justine beginning to understand that maybe that's where a woman's power comes from, is through her appearance. And I'm not kind of saying that that's the moral of the story at all, just that that's the way it was in the 1980s. I think that's still the way it is. I have a daughter who's nearly Justine's age, and I'm very aware of those concerns, and they trouble me deeply. But I love Mrs. Price as a character. I'm still, you know, she has stayed with me, and I'm still kind of unpicking the riddle of who she is too, which is what I ask the readers to do, and it's kind of an impossible question to answer. Sorry.
Thanks so much. We have some time for audience questions. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, over there, in the pink. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Srila. I like that in both your books there's an obvious power dynamic, right, at play, that basically both the characters, they have, in some way they can see themselves as being below these people. But what are your feelings on when the power is not as obvious, but still somehow perceived? In the sense, maybe sometimes there can be girls who think like their colleagues who might be more outspoken in class or more outspoken at work. They might be perceived to be maybe having power over them. And what do you think are the systems of patriarchy that help in making this perceived power appear like actual power? I don't know if my question is clear. Sorry, it's very vague. If you want, I can clarify.
What are the... so are you asking what are the... what is it that makes people perceive the patriarchy? Is that your question?
No, my question is, like in both the books that you've spoken about today, there's an obvious hierarchy there, right? Like there's a teacher there who's perceived as being more powerful than the student, or there's a landlord who's seen as being more powerful. These are very established power dynamics that someone does have some power over the other. But what about in situations when there's not such an obvious dynamic? Like what about situations in which women feel like their colleagues, even though they might be on the same level, might actually be more powerful because they think that they might have a higher chance of getting a promotion, and men sort of are they have a skill of making themselves appear as if they have more power than they actually do. What are your thoughts on that?
So can you just explain the last bit again in terms of what the question is exactly?
Basically, in situations when there might not be such an obvious demarcation, right? It's not a senior or a teacher or anyone like that, but it's someone who might be on the same hierarchy level as you, like a fellow student, classmate maybe in a sense, right? Or maybe another tenant in your book situations.
Thank you. So what I can say is that in the book, there are smaller hierarchies and less noticeable hierarchies. So within the students themselves, Justine and Amy are both sort of jostling for power. They both want to be Mrs. Price's pet. And then within the class, there are hierarchies of the pretty girls, the popular girls, and then the plain ones like Justine and Amy. And even within this really tight friendship between Justine and Amy, they have this game that they play, which is a game I remember playing as a child and horrifies me now, where the two best friends sit down and they rank the girls in their class from prettiest to ugliest. And they always put each other about fourth because that seems kind of believable, maybe stretching the truth a little bit, but they're very aware of the power that appearance confers on girls in particular. So yeah, right throughout the book, I'm interested in playing with notions of who is jostling to get a little bit more power and who is pretending that it doesn't matter. And all of those kind of unspoken power struggles are really interesting to me too, as well as the more obvious ones.
Yeah, I don't think this question really applies to your book so much, right? Okay, any other questions? Yeah, on the hat.
Hello, hi, good morning. My question is for Helga. I hope you are having a wonderful time here. So since you mentioned that you are from Norway and that your novel deals with themes of misogyny and lack of communication between partners and especially the silent conversations between partners. And that reminded me of the prolific Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen and his work A Doll's House, which deals with very similar themes. So I just want to ask whether you were influenced by or did it leave an impact on you? And do you think that the Norwegian society has changed over time? And how close is your novel related to the current modern Norwegian society?
Thank you. Interesting, very good questions, and good to bring up Ibsen. And of course, I think a lot of Norwegian writers has influenced me over time, and Ibsen is of course very good at the psychological and the communication that doesn't spell right out, that are existing under the lines, sort of a subtext to comment on society, the current society that we live in. And I not to compare myself to Ibsen in any way, but I am also of course trying to say something about who we are in our time and sort of comment on that through my literature. So So I think that's something we have in common. And your last question was that how the story relates to the modern society in Norway. My novel, how it. Yeah, I think that's sort of. I aim to write about the realistic and to depict a true sort of sense of who we are in Norway today. And I think I'm not the one to say that I succeed with that, but that is definitely my goal. And I in the reviews and critics of my novels, I think that's something that's being highlighted, that I aim to show how we to put modern problems, so to say, even though they are small problems or large problems in that part of the world, to under the sort of magnifying glass and look through a lens of sort of dissecting it and using family dynamics or other relationships as a starting point to say something about that, about politics, for example. Thank you very much.